Little did I know, the echoes of valor would soon give way to the haunting sounds of war, shaping me into a man forged in the crucible of conflict. The adventure I had always dreamed of was just beginning, but the path ahead would lead me far from the innocence of my childhood and into the harsh realities of a world at war. As we disembarked, the chaos of the docks engulfed me. Soldiers hurried about, shouting orders in clipped tones, their faces set with determination. I could feel the electric buzz of urgency in the air, as if the very atmosphere crackled with anticipation. The sounds of crates being unloaded and the clanking of metal on metal resonated like a war drum, quickening my heart rate. As I marched through the bustling streets toward the center, I observed the faces around me, some beamed with pride, while others wore expressions of concern. Each glance felt like a silent acknowledgement of the path I was choosing. I passed shops draped in flags, families gathering to celebrate their nation's strength, blissfully unaware of the horrors that lay ahead. "Have you heard the news?" he asked, his voice strained as I stepped into the room. My stomach twisted into knots. The news was often either cause for celebration or a source of fear, and I had a sinking feeling that this would be the latter. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and walked to the radio. "Expect resistance at any moment," Sergeant Matsumoto warned us. "This is not a training exercise. It's war." One felt the gravity of his words settle over me like a heavy shroud. The anticipation of battle gnawed at my insides, each passing moment feeling like a countdown to chaos. One afternoon, while we were practicing our formations, I felt the ground rumble beneath us. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the jungle, a reminder that we were not here to train for long. The excitement I had felt upon arrival quickly morphed into an oppressive weight on my chest. The enemy was out there, and soon we would face them. Shock surged through me. What did this mean? Would I have to fight? A wave of pride initially welled in my chest, quickly mixed with a growing dread. I glanced at my mother, her hands trembling as she gripped the kitchen counter, and felt a rush of determination. If war had come, then I must be ready to answer the call. "Welcome to Rabaul," shouted Sergeant Matsumoto, his voice rising above the din. "Get organized, we've got work to do." His words were both a command and a rallying cry. My fellow soldiers and I scrambled to grab our gear, each of us eager to prove our mettle. We were here to defend our emperor, and that thought filled me with a fierce pride. As the dust settled, I looked around at my fellow soldiers. Some were injured, and others were in shock. The chaos of battle etched across their faces. I felt a mix of triumph and horror. We had survived. But at what cost? The exhilaration of combat soon turned into a heavy realization of the consequences of our actions. Our first encounter with the enemy came sooner than I expected. It was dawn, and we were on patrol near a narrow path cutting through the jungle. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and vegetation, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. Suddenly, shots rang out, shattering the silence. The world around me exploded into chaos. That night, as I lay on the cold ground under a canopy of stars, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that had settled within me. I stared up at the sky, searching for answers among the constellations. My childhood dreams of heroism felt like a distant memory now, replaced by the stark reality of loss and fear. I had entered the fray, but I wasn't sure I was ready for what lay ahead. The morning sun peeked over the rooftops of Yokohama, casting long shadows across the cobbled streets where life was just beginning to stir. I stood on the balcony of our modest home, the salty scent of the Pacific Ocean wafting through the air, mingling with the fragrance of fresh rice being prepared by my mother in the kitchen. It was December 7th, 1941, a day that would soon become a turning point in history and my own life. The moment I turned it on, the room fell silent. The broadcaster's voice crackled with urgency, delivering news that felt both distant and immediate. "We have received reports of a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii," he announced. My heart raced. As the words sank in, they morphed from static noise into an impending reality, an act of war. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, the streets of Yokohama erupted with fervor. I found myself swept up in a throng of young men, each of us ignited by a newfound sense of purpose. We gathered in the square, faces alight with fervent spirit, chanting slogans in honor of our emperor. My heart beat in sync with the crowd, their cheers echoing in my ears like a drum. This was what it meant to be Japanese, standing united in the face of adversity. As I gazed out at the horizon, the ocean stretched infinitely before me. I had always dreamt of adventure, of sailing across these waters, but I never imagined I would do so as a soldier serving the emperor. Today felt different. There was a palpable energy in the air, a sense of foreboding and excitement that hummed through the city. I turned away from the view and slipped back inside our home. My parents were bustling about, the morning routine, with an unspoken tension that hung in the air like thick fog. My father's face was drawn, worry etched into his features, a stark contrast to the pride I had grown up with. Days blurred into one another. On December 10th, I received my orders to report to the Imperial Army's recruitment center. The weight of my duty settled on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. This was the moment I had prepared for, yet it filled me with a palpable anxiety. The sergeant's voice boomed as he called out names, each boy stepping forward, pledging their lives to the Emperor. When my name was finally called, a sense of finality washed over me. I stepped forward, heart racing, and saluted, declaring I am ready to serve. The words felt heavy, reverberating through the crowded room, sealing my fate. When I arrived at the center, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Young men, much like myself, stood shoulder to shoulder, each brimming with aspirations of valor and honor. I stood in line, the smell of sweat and fear mingling with the scent of fresh ink on official documents. As I filled out the forms, memories of childhood dreams of heroism and adventure flooded my mind, now entwined with the stark reality of war. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with both promise and peril. I would soon leave Yokohama, the familiar streets and faces, stepping into a world where loyalty and survival would be tested. As I boarded the transport ship bound for distant shores, I turned to look at my family one last time. My mother's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, while my father stood tall, pride etched into every line of his face. As the ship's horn echoed across the harbor, a sense of longing washed over me. I closed my eyes, recalling the laughter of friends and the warmth of home. The ship pulled away, the waves lapping against its hull, and I felt the weight of the ocean beneath me, deep, vast, and full of unknowns. My heart was a tempest of emotions as I whispered a silent promise. I will return. The air was thick with humidity as we stepped off the transport ship, the tropical sun beating down on us in Rabaul, New Britain. I squinted against the glare, taking in the landscape that would soon become a stage for our trials. Lush green hills rose in the distance, their beauty a stark contrast to the foreboding feelings churning in my gut. This was not the adventure I had envisioned. It was a foreign land filled with the promise of danger. Our first days were filled with rigorous training. We learned how to navigate the dense jungles, where the humidity clung to our skin like a second layer. Each day was an exhausting battle against the elements and our own limitations. The air was thick with the sound of cicadas and the distant crash of waves, but my mind was focused on the task at hand. We practiced maneuvers, ambush techniques, and survival skills, each lesson a reminder of the reality that awaited us. As we marched through the town, I couldn't help but marvel at the vibrant life around us. The local people went about their daily routines, seemingly oblivious to the presence of soldiers from a foreign land. Women hung colorful fabrics on lines strung between their homes, children played in the streets, and the scent of something savory wafted through the air. But beneath this lively surface, I sensed an undercurrent of tension. We were intruders, and soon that tension would erupt into chaos. Then came the orders that would change everything. We received word that Allied forces were advancing in the Solomon Islands. Our battalion was to prepare for deployment to Guadalcanal. The atmosphere shifted. We all understood that this was our first real taste of battle. Fear gripped me, but it was quickly overshadowed by a fierce determination. I was ready to defend my homeland, to prove my worth to my comrades and to the Emperor. The night before our departure, I sat alone on the beach, staring out at the vast expanse of the ocean. The moon cast a silver glow on the water, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore was soothing. I thought of home, the warmth of my mother's embrace, the laughter of friends, the simple joys of everyday life. Would I ever see it again? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I was a soldier now, and soldiers were not supposed to entertain doubts. As we boarded the transport vessels the next day, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I looked around at my fellow soldiers, some wore expressions of bravado, while others, like me, masked their fear with forced smiles. We set out, the boat slicing through the waves, carrying us toward the unknown. Arriving at Guadalcanal was like stepping into a nightmare. The island was shrouded in a thick blanket of humidity, and the sounds of nature were a cacophony of unsettling noises. In the distance, I could see smoke rising, evidence of conflict already brewing. Our commanding officers briefed us quickly, urging us to stay alert and prepared for anything. I dropped to the ground instinctively, heart racing as I heard my comrades shout commands and return fire. I could see the silhouettes of enemy soldiers moving through the trees, and my training kicked in. I aimed my rifle, hands trembling, and squeezed the trigger. Time slowed as I focused on my target, the weight of my actions bearing down on me. I couldn't think of anything but survival. I knew one thing for certain: war would change me. I could feel it in my bones, the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. As I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I whispered a silent prayer for strength, for my comrades, and for the hope that someday I would find my way back home. The sounds of gunfire were deafening, punctuated by the cries of the wounded. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I engaged with the enemy, Each shot fired a mix of fear and resolve, but it was also a revelation, a brutal awakening to the reality of war. The image of the enemy soldier I shot that day would haunt me for years to come. A ghost that would linger in my mind, a reminder of the life I took. No, I replied, shaking my head. We both still have a chance. My heart ached as I realized the gravity of my choice. I had not just spared a life, I had also put my own in jeopardy. Please just hold on, I said, fumbling in my pack for the first aid supplies we had been issued. I wrapped a bandage around his wound, feeling his warmth seep through the fabric. The jungle around us seemed to fade away, and for a moment, all that existed was the two of us, two young men caught in a war not of our making. Stay alert, whispered Corporal Saito, his eyes scanning the dense foliage. I nodded, though my mind was elsewhere. I thought of home, of my mother's comforting presence, and the warm meals she would prepare. I longed for the simplicity of those days before I had been thrust into this violent existence. Finish him off, a voice yelled from behind me, snapping me back to the present. I looked at the soldier again, his breathing labored, the fear in his eyes now tinged with something else pleading. I was torn. I could take a life, solidify my place as a soldier, or I could choose mercy. Form up. We're under attack, Sergeant Matsumoto barked, and we instinctively took positions behind whatever cover we could find. My hands shook as I gripped my rifle, my pulse pounding in my ears. Stay quiet, I urged him, my heart pounding. We moved slowly, my body tensed, as I listened for any signs of pursuit. We could hear the chaos of battle echoing in the distance, but it felt distant now, as if we were in a separate world. What are you doing? Someone shouted, but I didn't turn back. I reached the soldier, crouching beside him. His breath was shallow, and his eyes were filled with a mixture of relief and confusion. Listen to me, I said, my voice firm. You need to leave this place. Find a way to escape. Go back to your home. Tell them what happened here. I could see the shock on his face, but I pressed on. You deserve a chance, just like I do. He nodded, understanding washing over him. I took a moment to engrave his face into my memory, an ordinary man caught in an extraordinary circumstance. Go now, I urged. And with that, he nodded again, slowly rising to his feet. After months of fighting, I had become accustomed to the chaos of war. The sounds of gunfire and the sight of blood had faded into a grim familiarity. But that didn't mean I was immune to the toll it took on my spirit. Each encounter with the enemy carved deeper into my conscience, leaving behind shadows of doubt and regret. I had witnessed the death of friends, comrades I had shared laughter and dreams with, and the memories haunted me relentlessly. That day, our battalion had received orders to scout a new area rumored to harbor enemy forces. As we moved cautiously through the underbrush, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a steady reminder of my anxiety. We crept silently, the only sound being the crunch of leaves beneath our feet, and the air felt charged, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. As the dust settled, I caught sight of enemy soldiers emerging from the trees, their faces hardened by battle. They were fierce and relentless, their shouts echoing in the jungle like a war cry. I aimed my rifle, my breath hitching as I pulled the trigger, my mind racing. In that moment, it was about survival. It was about protecting my comrades. But in the chaos, I saw something that froze me in place. An enemy soldier, barely older than I was, had fallen. He lay on the ground, clutching his side, blood pooling around him. His eyes, wide with fear and pain, met mine for a fleeting moment. I felt the weight of his gaze, and a knot formed in my stomach. Suddenly, a deafening explosion shattered the silence. I dove to the ground instinctively, my heart racing. Dust and debris filled the air, obscuring my vision. Confusion reigned as shouts erupted around me. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Suddenly, a loud crack pierced the air, and I saw a flash of movement in the trees. The enemy soldier's eyes widened in fear. I knew that if my comrades saw me here, they would not hesitate to shoot. I quickly made the decision to drag him deeper into the underbrush, away from the line of fire. I searched for the right words, but all I could say was, "Because we are all human." I felt the weight of that statement resonate deeply within me. Finally, we found a small clearing, hidden by thick vines and ferns. I pressed my back against a tree, my breath heavy with exhaustion and fear. The young soldier lay beside me, his face pale. "You saved my life," he whispered, tears glistening in his eyes. But what would happen to this soldier? The weight of my choice hung heavy in the air. I looked at him. His breathing steadied, though the fear was still evident in his eyes. I took a deep breath, knowing what I had to do. I got separated during the fight, I lied, my voice steady. They nodded, relieved that I was safe, and we returned to the grim realities of war. But deep down, I knew I would carry the weight of that choice with me always. The jungles of Guadalcanal had changed me, stripped away the romantic notions of heroism I had once held. I had entered this conflict seeking glory, but found myself grappling with the complexity of humanity instead. That night, As I lay on the hard ground beneath a blanket of stars, I could still see the face of the enemy soldier in my mind, the boy with had once been my enemy but had become something more. I closed my eyes, whispering a silent prayer not just for myself, but for him and all those caught in the web of war. I had made a choice, and now, all I could do was hope it had not been in vain. The stifling heat of Guadalcanal enveloped me like a suffocating blanket as I trudged through the jungle, my boots sinking into the damp earth with each step. It was May 1942. And the rain-soaked terrain was a treacherous maze of thick foliage and twisting roots. The cacophony of nature surrounded me, the chirping of insects, the distant rustle of unseen creatures, and the ever-present hum of tension in the air. Each day felt like a battle against both the enemy and the elements, but it was the battles within my mind that weighed most heavily on my soul. I could have pulled the trigger again, could have ended his life without a second thought, but something stopped me. It was a choice that had never felt so heavy. I hesitated, and in that brief pause, I could see the humanity in his eyes, the raw desperation that mirrored my own. He was not just an enemy, he was a person, a young man caught in the same storm of war. Time seemed to stretch as I wrestled with my thoughts. I thought of my family, of the love and warmth I had left behind, and the dreams I had once held. I thought of the innocence I had lost and the path I had chosen. I felt a surge of empathy for this young man who likely had his own family, dreams, and fears. In that moment of clarity, I made my choice. I lowered my rifle, my heart racing as I shouted, "Hold your fire!" The cries of my comrades echoed in my ears, but I couldn't go through with it. I ran toward the enemy soldier, my own comrade staring at me in disbelief. My heart raced as I worked, and I could hear the sounds of battle continuing around us. "Why?" he gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you helping me?" After what felt like hours, the sounds of battle began to subside. My comrades were calling out for me, their voices echoing through the jungle. I was torn, knowing I had to return to them, to the reality of war. As he disappeared into the jungle, I felt a strange mix of emotions swirling within me: fear, guilt, and a flicker of hope. I had made a choice, one that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I had stepped away from the path of a soldier, even if just for a moment, and chosen compassion over duty. When I returned to my battalion, I was met with questions and concern. "Where were you?" Sergeant Matsumoto asked, his brow furrowed. I didn't know how to explain. I couldn't share the truth. It felt too vulnerable, too raw.